the example of Zohran Mamdani. And so sometimes it's because he comes from a Shia background, the question comes up, what is our perspective? And, he mingles with men and women and with all groups of the political, sphere there. So what is our stand on this issue? And I would like to, clarify this issue. What was he standing up for? Unless we put him at a pedestal there, he becomes a role model for all Muslims, that we sometimes make that a problem. That distinction has to be made between the positions which are of secular nature, administrative positions, versus those positions which are in religious institutions. Anyone who stands for justice and equality for all, especially for minorities and Muslims, we would support that candidate even if he or she is from other faith. Basically, our standard has always been, and I'll emphasize about it many times, that when it comes to the party or candidate, we have to look for the one which upholds justice for all, especially for the minorities. When you look at the first migration in the history of Islam, this is before the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ, when the mushrikeen of Mecca started torturing the Muslims, those Muslims who were socially weak in the sense that they didn't have the tribal support. And when it reached to the physical torture, people like Yasir and Sumayya, the parents of Ammar al-Yasir, this is where the Prophet basically, asked the Muslims, some of them, go away from Mecca. Those days there was no city or a country outside Mecca where Muslims were there. And so where do they go? And this is where the Prophet says, go to Abyssinia. According to the historians, they say the Prophet said, Inna bil Habasha malakan la yudlam indahu ahadun. Because in Habasha, in Abyssinia, there is a king. Nobody is treated unfairly in his domain in a way. فَلَوْ خَرَجْتُمْ إِلَيْهِ, so it is better you would go to that country until Allah, inshallah, finds a final, solution for you. And this is where we get this indication that if you are not in a Muslim country or you are making a decision to move to a place which is predominantly non-Muslim, what should be the criteria? The criteria has to be adl and justice as a fundamental value for our migration, as well as what I call for engagement with the socio-political system. Even if it is being upheld and promoted by those who do not have our faith, they are not non-Muslims, they are just secularists. But if they, maintain fairness and justice for the people of their country, especially for the minorities, that would be the choice for us in this part of the world. Ideally, we always pray that we will see a Muslim or a Shia who is proud of, their faith and do not shy away from their religious identity. And this is what brings me to this issue, because people have been wondering why I haven't said anything about this recent event. The example of Zohran Mamdani. Recently he won the mayoral election for New York. His victory on one hand was indeed a shock for the Trump administration and his MAGA community, and more so for the pro-Israel lobby, which also is reflected by the letter signed by 850 rabbis against him. So there was a full-fledged, campaign, even on a religious level, among the Jewish community in the United States of America against him, especially because of his stand on the Palestinian issue. And so sometimes it's because he comes from a Shia background, the question comes up, what is our perspective? And this is where I would say again, as I have said this all along, anyone who stands for justice and equality for all, especially for minorities and Muslims, we would support that candidate even if he or she is from other faith. So when it comes to somebody who is a Muslim or a Shia, now there are other kind of, discussion going on. Oh, Maulana, his wife doesn't observe hijab. He mingles with men and women and with all groups of the political sphere there. So what is our stand on this issue? And I would like to clarify this issue. To simplify the issue, the question is then, what position were you voting him for? What was he standing up for? Is it a religious position in a religious institution? Or is it a secular position in a liberal political system? You get the difference there? To put it in a fiqhi terminology, there is a distinction between what is known as al-manasib al-diniyya wal-manasib al-idariyya. Al-manasib al-diniyya, we're talking about the positions in a religious institution. Al-manasib al-idariyya means these are administrative positions. Could be in any setting, secular setting also. So this is where you have to make that distinction very clear. That's where the problem is. Sometimes we merge one with the other. If you are looking for someone to fill a religious position in our faith and madhab, then you have to choose somebody who is a Shia Isna Ashari, well versed in relevant religious laws, and who demonstrates those values, at least publicly in his life. Because, for example, if you are choosing a marja, or a religious guide, or imam of a masjid, or a khatib of the Mimbar Hussaini, or a madrasa teacher, or an official of a religious organization, then the person's faith and behavior, at least in public, is relevant. In these situations, basically, for a religious position, you will look for iman and taqwa, because this is manasib al-diniyya. But if you're looking for someone to fill a secular position, an administrative position in a secular political system, then you have to choose somebody who is just and fair to all, especially the minorities and the weak segments of the society. In such a case, you should look at a person's administrative capabilities and their sense of fairness and justice. What they do is not really that much a concern for us. Unless we put him at a pedestal there, he becomes a role model for all Muslims, that's your problem there. He doesn't ask for that. We sometimes make that a problem. So if such a person, happens to be a Muslim and a Shia, of course we will support that person for that specific position. We will not ask him, to lead the Jamaat prayers. Just because now he is that secular, position there. We will not ask him to come and give sermon on Jummah prayers, or even teach in the madrasa or sit on the mimbar and recite a majlis. That distinction has to be made between the positions which are of secular nature, administrative positions, versus those positions which are in religious institutions. They are two different things, two different standards, two different expectations that we would have from the person holding that position. Because this is something, this is where people get confused. And for example, one of the alim from New York supported him. So there was a backlash by some. Oh, how can you do this? Because not everything is kosher as far as his, interaction with people is concerned. Oh, that alim in New York supported him, not for everything that he does in his life. It was only for his, outlook on the social, political issue of justice and fairness, and that's it. So things, when we talk about it, is not black and white here. It must be you must be selective in the purpose of your support in these kinds of situations. If a candidate can deliver justice and fairness in society, You would support him for that specific objective, irrespective of other aspects of their lives. You do not vote for that lifestyle of the person. Rather, you vote for his administrative capacities to uphold fairness and justice for all in society.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد